Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Like Jay said, I am Christof Just, or just Christof, however you want to look at it. I think I made the mistake of sending Trish some Snapchat pics and videos of our cows and landscape at Berlin, because now she thinks I should be up here talking about it, which is kind of terrifying, to be honest. But I do farm and ranch with my wife Kelly and our three kids. Where's our three kids? Oh, either way. Kelly, she wears many hats. She works at the tax department at Ag Country. She manages our local ambulance service, volunteers a bunch, but mostly just does a good job taking care of all of us. And Carly is in the Guards and a student at VCSU, and Katrina is up here in Bismarck at BSC in the nursing program, and Cole is a freshman at Lemoore High School, and he's only 15 and not looking up to me much anymore, so we'll see how tall he gets. But he's my tech guy here today. So our farm, oh yeah, we're right just north of the metropolis of Berlin, North Dakota. Our farm used to be a sheep farm back in the 60s and early 70s, but the livestock, they kind of left for the most part before my time. There was some cows around. We really didn't get back into livestock until I started with a few cows about 20 years ago, and it was kind of just able to build from there and learn on my own for the most part. I didn't grow up ranching. So does anyone know what's wrong with this picture?
It's got to be handled again to be fed.
Yep. No, the problem is the cows are never going to get a square meal. My kids love my dad jokes, so I'd throw that in there. When thinking about what I could share today, I decided to talk about some winter feeding and grazing practices and how these strategies can be beneficial to both the livestock, but maybe more importantly, the land. And I know this is not the North Dakota Cropland Coalition, but I just thought I'd share a couple ways we're trying to incorporate livestock onto some of our cropland. Not sure who came up with the principles of soil health. I don't know if it was someone within the NRCS, but we know them. They're minimize disturbance, maximize living roots, or keep a living root growing as long as possible, maximize soil cover, or at least try and maintain soil cover, and then maximize biodiversity. And I think we're pretty familiar with them, but I guess maximizing biodiversity covers livestock integration, but sometimes we see two more principles added as livestock integration, and then the last one being context. So obviously we are integrating livestock on rangeland, but it seems like most cropland is missing this principle. And it is a principle because every acre is its own ecosystem. And I just strongly believe that there's no such thing as a healthy ecosystem without animals in it. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here with this group, as most of you are graziers. I like the word graziers. I spent about 8 months on a cattle and grain property in Queensland, Australia, when I was about 19 or going on 20, and they didn't say rancher, they said grazier, because that's what they did. They were grazing animals, and I think sometimes rancher for us can mean doing about anything and everything but grazing animals some days. So what am I trying to accomplish? Well, I want to provide adequate nutrition to our cattle so they're getting bred, staying healthy, gaining weight, basically generating revenue, which is why we're ranching in the first place, or trying to make a living. But number two, I want to recognize that the cows can be dual purpose and that they can be used as a tool to build soil, cycle nutrients, manage residue, stimulate biology, and add fertility. Basically, my goal is to, as much as possible, manage cattle in a way that allows them to make a positive contribution to their own forage and to the cropland. Or in other words, contribute to soil health. The tough part is that this can be a balancing act. And I think we have to think of it as a net positive. You know, sometimes we take some steps back and feel like we're doing a little more harm than good, but the main thing is, you know, if we're moving in the right direction, then we're doing all right. It gets stressful when the ground thaws and we deal with mud, and we dealt with some of that in the middle of this last winter when we were having thawing conditions. But most of the time, frozen ground can be a real competitive advantage when we're grazing and feeding on cropland up here in the northern plains. So something I just think kind of focus on or really realize about a cow is that she's a very inefficient animal. I mean, if we want to raise the most efficient animal, then we should be fish farmers. Fish can convert less than 2 pounds of grain into a pound of gain. Poultry, around 2 pounds or a little more to put on a pound of gain. Pork is kind of next, and basically beef is at the very bottom. I know we're talking about grain here, but I think we can draw some analogies with forage. And actually, this is one of the big arguments used by people who say we shouldn't eat beef because they're so efficient. Why not just take this grain or feed and feed it directly to people? But I want to turn the argument around and basically ask the question, you know, how can we take advantage of this inefficiency? Basically, a cow's inefficiency is what makes her such a efficient soil builder. I just think this is a key thing, and it's actually underappreciated about ruminant animals like cattle. We know that most of what goes in the front comes out the back. Very little gets walked off the field in the form of growth or just maintenance. And seen different figures, but anywhere from 80 to 85 to 90+% of intake comes right out the back. And I also want to point out that, and this is just some crop ground that we fed on, and it's kind of what I want it to look like after we've fed on it, the residues managed and a decent distribution of manure and urine. But I also want to point out that when we think of manure, we often we're thinking of the solids but the urine might actually be the most valuable part. In the urine is where 2/3 of the nitrogen is, and 90% of the potassium, which in terms of forage response or most of the crops we raise, obviously the nitrogen we're getting the biggest response from, so that's just a valuable part of it. And I mean, pretty much if we have cows in a lot, how much urine is going to be hauled out with a spreader? It's pretty much lost, I would say. And I think this is one of the reasons we see forage responses like this. I kind of stole this slide from another presentation, so I hope credit can go where credit is due, but there's about 3 slides here that kind of really sum up a lot of what I am trying to say here today. I just think it tells the story. Group of animals, fed in a lot, and then same size group of animals were compared, fed the same amount of feed. One group, the manure was scraped up, fed out on the pasture, and on the bottom there, the bales were processed and fed directly on that pasture, and we basically doubled the pounds of forage per acre. So I just think that's pretty hard to give up, or we need to manage in a way to take advantage of this. Even in terms of a calving period, like there's a lot of talk, we move our calving date back to take care of take advantage of the grass greening up and the warm temperatures and stuff. But I even think of it, if I'm calving in February, or most Februaries, I got to have them up by the barn, and then I can't feed them out where they can leave their nutrients where they're beneficial. Go on to the next one there, Cole. Another slide, if you look at like that 5x6 bale, which is probably the most common, in a 1,500 pound bale, they've calculated $58 worth of nutrients in a 1,500 pound bale. I mean, that if we can just keep cycling those nutrients, it definitely lowers the cost of any imported hay or even our own hay. I know they got urea at $900 a ton, which it's come down. I mean, I think it's probably half of that now, but still, the point being, a lot of value, a lot of nutrient value in that hay. Go on to the next one. This is a understanding ag slide, but looks like Jim Garish put it together. 30 to 50 pounds of nitrogen in a ton of hay, 90% of which is passed through. So we need that to go land directly where it can get put to good use, and it's nitrogen that's immediately plant available too. That's the other neat thing. So I just think some of this stuff gives me a little room. I'm not the best marketer or the lowest cost producer, and my cows are too big, and probably genetics need to be improved, but if I can use them as a tool, it gives me a little room to screw up in some of these other areas, which I probably am. So I didn't want to stand up here and drone on about cow shit, or maybe you guys think I'm full of it, but just trying to lay down a foundation that when we're doing something like swath grazing, which I'll talk about it's a lot more. It's about a lot more than feeding cows. Oh, another interesting note, or I thought it was interesting. I heard somewhere that in ancient Chinese culture, if someone had you over to their house to eat, it was actually rude if you went back home without going to the bathroom before you left. So they knew they had to take advantage of this cycle. They couldn't just call the co-op and line up the spreader to come spread urea on their crops. So I think it's rude of my cows to leave their nutrients where I can't take advantage of them. And I am being a little bit hypocritical here because this is a picture of my small feedlot taken, I don't know, a month ago or something. And I guess it does work good for me to wean here and kind of get them ready for market because I can sell them as backgrounded calves and there's good wind protection and stuff like that here. But I'm trying, I guess, if nothing else, I'm trying to have them in here for a less amount of time is what. And this was built, I built it about 20 years ago with the help of a 319 watershed grant, and it was called an ag waste system. Well, I've heard Jay Fuhr, very wise man, he talks about, making our whole farm an ag waste system. And then it's not waste, it's a resource. So it's only waste if it's concentrated like this. But anyway, there's many ways to integrate livestock onto crop ground, but I thought I would talk about my experience with swath grazing. So this past December was our first go at it, but it's something that I've wanted to try for several years. I'm not 100% sure, but I think a lot of credit has to go to our Canadian neighbors for developing this practice. And I think, well, they've been doing it for a long time, but I think one of the things that got them going on it was it back in 14 when mad cow really knocked the cattle prices, especially in Canada, to where they were almost, cull cows were pennies a pound. So they started doing things just to, maybe more than keep them alive, but really searching for ways to be really low input. So, and that's where some of the bale grazing and stuff, I think, got going too. But as it turns out, they did it for motivated by other reasons, but then it turned into be a pretty good practice. So, swath grazing, how does it work? If only we could invent a machine that could be self-propelled and gather up all this forage and mix it in a fermentation chamber for about 24 hours and then add a bunch of beneficial microbes to it and spread it back on the field as compost. And I want my cowbine to appreciate because it's gaining weight, and then it might as well reproduce itself too. And it's going to need to be red because apparently earthworms like red machines a lot better than green, according to a poster in one of our local dealerships that I won't leave unnamed. But we swath grazed 50 acres, and last spring it started out as rye and hairy vetch and winter camelina, but it was mostly rye. We grazed the rye as forage and used it to calve on, or we're kicking new pairs into it. And I'm not sure how many head days we got out of it, but it was a great spot to calve on and for new pairs. I wanted to keep track, but we were busy planting, and it seemed like we were always adding stuff to it, and kind of got lost in the shuffle. But we did divide the field in half and rotated back and forth a couple times, just in an effort to keep the rye vegetative and kind of manage the rye. But then after the rye was grazed as much as we could, we terminated it. I think it was in late June with Roundup and some 2,4-D. The field did sit fallow from late June until oats was planted on August 7th. And at the time, it really kind of was bugging me that this field was sitting fallow, even just for that month and a half or something, because it was in the middle of the growing season and our longest hours of daylight, and I thought, what am I doing here? But in the end, I think it gave the rye sequestered a lot of nutrients, and it gave some of those nutrients time to mineralize. And with the grazing, I think there was a lot of nutrition provided for the oats crop that was going to get. The plan was to swath graze it. So we planted 2 bushels of Goliath forage oat, and it was no-tilled in with no fertilizer. And then we took oats. What do I got here? The oats took off. It was growing good. We were blessed with some nice fall rains, which kind of obviously contributed to this whole thing working well, which we don't get every fall. But we cut the oats on about October 2nd when it was in the boot stage. And we definitely targeted the boot stage with it being the intersection of maximum yield and quality in small grain hay. And one of the things with swath grazing is we want to try and lock in some of that quality like we're haying. And even though we weren't going to graze it for a while, it does seem to keep pretty good quality in the swath. We cut the oats with a 12.5 foot disc vine. This wasn't the oats. The tree's green in the background, so it's not October, but this was Cole cutting some forage barley earlier in the year, but anyway, it's the machine we used. And the oats was lush, very lush, and with it being the first part of October, normally would be very difficult to dry a crop like that down if you were planning to hay it with the shorter day lengths or shorter daylight hours and cooler temperatures. But kind of another advantage to swath grazing, we weren't worried about drying it down. At least I didn't know how this was all going to work, but we weren't going to try and put it in a bale. So we kind of was like, well, okay, it's wet. What do you do? The YouTube videos that I watched about swath grazing, they recommended that you should make about as big a swath as possible. And I think the idea behind that is, in the event that you get a lot of snow on top of it, it's just easier for the cattle to dig out and find. So I raked 4 windrows together, which V-raked them together, which was basically 48 plus feet of oats. So it was a big windrow. And then getting ready to graze, we didn't start grazing it till the middle of November, but getting ready to graze, I divided the field in half with a high tensile wire. And this wire ran lengthwise or with the swaths, and that way I had, when I did my daily moves with the poly wire and pigtail posts, I could tap into that high tensile wire for power, and I only had to walk about halfway across the field. And I had water down at the west end, and we just moved away from the water. And since the time of the year and there's nothing regrowing, we weren't worried about a back fence or anything like that, so we just kept moving down the field. We did one half and then moved to the other side. You can see the south side of the field has been grazed off. Now we're working on the north side here. This was Cole's has a drone and took this video one day. It's kind of fun. What else do I got here? Yeah. So basically we just used 2 geared reels, and when I would roll up one reel and let the cows into a new set of swaths, I would take that reel and just leapfrog ahead and set it up for the next day. So then we had 2 wires in front of them, which in case they got through the first wire, and I think that only happened once, then you had a backup. And it wasn't too big of a mess. I don't know what happened the one day they got through it, but they seemed like they respected that poly wire really well. Kind of a neat thing we found was the ground did freeze, but it didn't freeze underneath the swaths. So we could just kind of kick that windrow apart, and the swaths were a pretty good spacing for our pigtail posts anyway. So we didn't have to mess around with drilling holes or anything like that for our pigtail posts, because the ground stayed thawed underneath the swaths. And the group we grazed was about 207 pair. I think there was 10, 11 bulls in there. But it was kind of fun because it probably took 15 minutes to move the wire. And then it was kind of like every time I moved the wire, it felt like the equivalent to baling the oats and hauling the oats off and hauling the bales back to the cows and unrolling the bales and then maybe even hauling some manure. So you're kind of accomplishing that with just moving a wire. I think things are a little cumbersome around my place once in a while, but there was the 22 days we grazed that, I felt like I was doing something kind of efficient. I was happy with the amount of residual left, and arguably it could have even been a little more. They really cleaned it up. And without a lot of snow, I think it would have been sufficient just to rake 2 windrows together, because they probably would have spread the manure a little more evenly, just because the swaths would have been spread a little more evenly. And it's pretty much my goal to leave a field to where we can just no-till into it the next spring. And that's why something like bale grazing can be tricky on crop ground, because it's just a little too much residue to no-till into, and there's just, if you want to plant early in the spring, there's just not enough time for biology to break that residue down if it's kind of thick. So yeah, I mean, we can handle a fair amount of residue as long as it's evenly distributed, I guess is the deal. A couple additional benefits that went along with the swath grazing, I thought, was we calve pretty much in May and into June. So, and we're weaning little later. We don't wean till after the first of the year. But there was pretty decent nutrition there. Go to that next slide. Cool. I did pull a sample just out of the swath and have it tested, and the protein was more than they needed at 14% there, and it showed because they were a little loose. Just looking at the TDN, like the net energy for gain there, pretty good for cows, but arguably maybe a little bit short on energy for calves that are starting to need a little more to keep growing. But the calves were not weaned, so I figured they were getting an energy supplement from mom, basically. And then another nice thing was doing those daily moves. It just seems to gentle the calves, and the cows, which is pretty handy right before weaning. How are we doing for time here?
5 minutes.
5 minutes?
Yep.
Jeez. My wife usually does most of the talking, so this is kind of a marathon for me. Go to that next slide real. I'm going to skip over this, but I thought the economics were, I almost feel like I'm missing something because it seemed almost better than what it should be. Maybe that's the old German in me. I don't think it can be good or something, but just go to the next slide. Just feeding on crop ground and why it's kind of cumbersome, but I make the effort. In a lot of years, we start here. We'll blade a path just to physically be able to get the feed wagon or the bale processor out there, and then go ahead, Cole. I just think this slide tells a big story too. If you look on then we'll blade the snow so we can get the wagon out there or whatever. We feed the cows, and then if you can see that ridge of snow to the left of the cows, and then if you go over to that other slide where the grass is short, that's the ridge of snow where we didn't feed on. This happened to be a piece of grass. But getting such a nice response from feeding out there, just in terms of the height of the grass and the color of the grass and the width of the leaves. So I think can really be worth the effort. That picture is kind of taken from roughly the same spot looking north. Go ahead, Cole. We were grazing some cover crop here on the left one year, and where that bale is kind of just a salty desert. Like weeds won't even grow there. Kochia or foxtail barley won't even grow there. So I just plopped a crappy CRP bale there, and I think they used it as a scratching post more than ate it, but they trampled it down. And then the middle slides the next year, planted through it. That corn didn't make it on that spot, but something was growing versus nothing. And then the next year, we had a few soybeans that would grow there where you can see it, where that bale wasn't, nothing would grow. And there's even a little probably kochia coming in there. So just something simple like that, integrating livestock, moving the needle in a positive direction. What's after that? Oh, we do a lot of this whenever we feed with the bale buster or feed wagon. We always do it in piles, just so I always want their heads in and their spreader end. We just soil a little less feed that way versus just dropping it in the line. Go ahead, Cole. And then it kind of looks like that, and that's something we can plant into the following spring, usually. I'm running out of time here, but just a couple closing thoughts here, one of the biggest things right now is biologicals or bugs in a jug. And I was talking to a friend, he's also a salesman, the other day, and he had a new product. I think he said it had 8 to 10 species or types of bacteria in it. And recommended that you apply it to the seed, costs $12 an acre. And I'm not knocking it, but because they appear to be getting a good yield response, and I might even try it, but he mentioned that it doesn't overwinter well. Have to apply it every year. Why would a company want to develop a product that you only have to buy once, I guess? But I just really like the idea that a cow's gut is where we overwinter biology. It's always dark at the right temp, perfect moisture level. You know, how closely is the biology in a ruminant's gut and the microbiome of the soil tied together? I think livestock on the land is the continuum. And I think we talk a lot about unintended consequences in regenerative ag circles. But a lot of times we talk about negative unintended consequences, like we pour our cows with ivermectin and to kill lice and worms and grubs and whatever, but then the ivermec ends up in the manure, and we unintentionally kill dung beetles, and then now we have no beetles to move the cow pad into the soil profile, and now we've screwed up the phosphorus cycle and on and on. But I just like what Alan Williams always says, is that nothing we do is neutral. Everything we do sets off a compounding and cascading chain of events, good or bad. So I don't think we have to understand everything going on under our feet, and we certainly don't. But what can we do to set off a positive chain of unintended consequences? And I think that's what the principles of soil health are about, just basically letting nature do what it's always done. That's all I got. Any questions?
Did you do any soil sampling before you did your bale grazing there on that 50 acres, or to know where you're at with the base and then go back to spring? And
I didn't there, but kind of like where the rye, I think, sequestered a lot of nutrients, and then with grazing them and the rye mineralizing, I think we provided a lot of nutrition for the oats, but now hopefully I can just keep cycling, because I really didn't walk anything or remove anything off the field for whatever I'm going to plant there this coming spring. So it's hopefully, maybe I could still pull a soil test this spring and not need to fertilize much after where I swath grazed. I know, like the Canadians, they whenever they do a field swath graze, they want to plant something that can take advantage of good amount of nitrogen, like corn or something. If they do it too much, they'll have lodging issues and stuff, because there's almost too much fertility there. So go ahead.
How do you justify the cost of rolling your windrows together as compared to just leaving them single?
Well, I don't think there was a big cost to rolling them together, which I put $5 an acre on it. And the reason I did it, like I say, is I think if it was going to get covered up with a bunch of snow, you just want a certain amount of material there, so once the cows find it or get it opened up, they can just keep going down the windrow. But if you were gonna graze it earlier on or thought you could get it before a lot of snow, then you're right. I don't think you'd need to roll them together. And depending on how, you know, heavy of a crop it is, if it's a, you know, pretty short crop, I think you want to put something together. Otherwise, if you're not grazing it pretty soon, it kind of gets lost a little bit or might fall down in the stubble. So.
Did you leave it fallow for that month and a half on purpose, or was that kind of just the way?
I think it's kind of the way it worked out because I didn't know exactly what I was going to do after I grazed the rye. I knew I wanted to put something there, like a cover crop to graze, and I didn't even have the plan locked in to swath graze this oats until, I don't know, things just kind of progressed and it was like, seemed like a good spot to try it.
The economics slide back up.
Sure. You know, I think one of the big things about swath grazing versus just doing like a cover crop mix and then grazing that cover crop mix, I know waste is not waste, but we also want to feed our cows. If you're just grazing something, I don't know what your efficiency is. You know, it could be 30 to 50% versus picking up these swaths. I think you're 80+%. So there's that. And then the other big deal, if I was just going to plant like a cover crop mix and graze it later in the fall, which I've done quite a few times, you lose a lot of quality. I mean, whether it's sorghum Sudan or some things keep their quality pretty well. I mean, I struggle to get the head days off cover crop mixes that I graze later in the fall. So I think you pick up efficiency in terms of what you're getting in the cow and you're locking in quality. That's what I found.
How'd you dial in how far you needed to move that poly wire every day? Did you weigh a section of swath? And kind of
No, I just kind of played it by ear. So this field had a barbed wire fence around it. And we just kind of took a guess, and then you went out the next day and it was like, they're a little short, or I want them to clean it up a little better. So then I just gave them like one more fence post or cut back one more. There was nothing too scientific about it. It was just kind of calibrating it as we go. And it's certainly, if you wanted to do 3-day moves, it would be just fine. I just think the more you give them, obviously they're going to soil a little more and not clean it up quite as well, which maybe in some cases that's what you want. Or if you have to be gone, give them 3 days. But daily moves it was a field that was pretty close by, so it was pretty simple just to run out there, and it was, compared to how long it normally takes us to feed, and like I say, that 15 minutes moving that wire is like, that's a nice way to feed a couple hundred pair in a very short amount of time. Plus we were combining corn at the time, so it fit in well with, you run out there, move the wire, and then go combine the rest of the day.
So you're going to try to expand that for next year then?
I think I will. I don't know exactly what it'll look like, but there's a couple different ways to go about it. Like, you could probably plant sorghum Sudan and millet like a warm season mix, but I don't know if you'd be able to get any kind of a crop in ahead of that. That would be more of a full season mix. And they do say those kind of warm season crops really weather well because they have a waxy coating on the leaf. So it's something you could leave out there even longer and doesn't deteriorate as much in the swath. But I kind of like I mean, it worked out good to kind of have two cool season crops on the front end and the back end of the growing season too. But there's a lot of ways you could maybe do it.
When did you see the rye?
The previous, late September, yeah. Yep. Yes, sir.
Where did you find your statistics for the urine stuff? Because I played with the manure part of it way back when I was doing an FFA project. I had a dairy operation, and then I did some testing by myself, did a science project to boot on it with the different types of manure and fertilizer, and which crop would do the best of this and that. But I've never seen those statistics on the urine.
I stole them from other presentations, so I don't know if but I just want to share it and take it for what it's worth. I probably need to give credit if I could find it, where that is.
I'm curious to know the crop before the rye and what you plan to put in this spring.
Yeah, that's, well, as far as what I'm want to put there this spring, I'm contemplating planting corn, but thinking about if I'm brave enough to do a corn grazing. It's a field that it's surrounded by some existing pasture, and I've debated, I want to plant it back to grass. But I just can't, I can get so much more production by doing something like this than what it seems like I can with grass. So I'm kind of, as much as I want it to be grass, I'm kind of struggling to give up that kind of production I'm finding. And then I'm trying to remember what I had before the rye. Why can't I remember that? Give me a minute. Do you remember what we had before the rye?
Soybeans.
Yeah, it was soybeans. It was soybean. It was we were able to harvest the soybeans early enough to come right behind the combine pretty much and plant rye.